I'm not sure how to even begin telling this. I guess I should just dive in and say it. I was married to Linda for almost 7 years, and looking back, it feels like I spent most of that time in a fog, believing everything was as it should be. We met in college, both young and excited about life. I was a regular guy, nothing special, just someone who worked hard and tried to make the best of things. She was smart, ambitious, and pretty. One of those women who walked into a room and commanded attention without even trying. Honestly, I thought I hit the jackpot with her. In the beginning, things were great. I don't think anyone has that perfect marriage, but we had fun. We took trips, went out on dates, laughed a lot. Sure, we had our disagreements, but I figured that was normal. No couple is perfect, right? We had a rhythm. Life was just good. I was proud of my marriage and felt like we were building something solid. Even when life got busy, we always made time for each other. At least I thought we did. But something started to change, slowly. It wasn't dramatic at first. Just little things that didn't sit right with me. Linda began going out with her friends more often. Again, I didn't think too much of it at first. She worked hard, and I figured she deserved a night out here and there. I wasn't one of those controlling husbands who thought his wife should stay home all the time. I was working long hours myself, so the idea of her going out to unwind seemed fine. But the frequency increased. It went from an occasional girls' night to a couple of nights a week. Then weekends, too. She'd come home late, sometimes after I'd already gone to bed. When I asked how the night went, she'd just wave it off. Oh, just a few drinks, she'd say, or we just went to that new bar downtown. No details, no excitement in her voice like there used to be when she'd tell me about her days. It was like she was pulling away, little by little, and I didn't know how to handle it. I figured maybe it was just a phase. She was working a lot, always under pressure with her job, and I didn't want to be the husband who nagged her. If she needed space, I could give it to her. I kept telling myself that. But the longer it went on, the more I noticed things didn't feel quite right. She'd come home, give me a quick peck on the cheek, then go straight to bed without even asking how my day went. No hugs. No real conversation. It wasn't that she was being rude, it's like she was just distant. I'd try to brush it off. Maybe I was being paranoid. We were both busy, and life was stressful. Maybe she was just going through something, and I didn't need to make it a big deal. After all, we'd been married for years. We had a foundation, right? That's what I kept telling myself. But the more I thought about it, the more I started noticing other things. The way she'd always have her phone with her, even when we were watching TV together, and the way she'd smile whenever a message popped up. It was subtle, but it was different. I told myself I was being insecure. I mean, she was my wife. Why would I think she was up to something? We had history. We had trust. I had to trust her. That's what marriage is, right? Still, there was a part of me that just knew something wasn't right. I didn't know what exactly, but I felt it in my gut. And it wasn't until that one phone call that my whole world turned upside down. It's crazy how fast things can change when you least expect it. One evening, I was sitting at home, just finishing up some work when my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered anyway. To this day, I'll never forget the voice on the other end. He introduced himself as Derek. At first, I thought it was some kind of prank, or maybe someone trying to sell me something. But when he said my wife's name, I froze. He told me that he knew Linda, and that she had been unfaithful to me. My first reaction was to laugh it off, because, come on, this is my wife we're talking about. Linda, the woman I trusted more than anyone. But the guy didn't laugh. He wasn't joking. Derek went on to explain that he wasn't the only one. That Linda had been seeing multiple men behind my back. I'm not sure what shocked me more, the fact that my wife was cheating, or that this guy seemed so casual about it. As if it was no big deal. He didn't seem to care at all. He said he had proof. I honestly thought it was just some kind of sick joke at first, but then he sent me a photo. It was of Linda, out at some club, looking all dolled up, surrounded by a group of guys. I could barely recognize her. She looked so different than when we were together. She was laughing, leaning into one of them. I'd never seen her like that. So carefree and untethered. Then came another photo. This one was harder to stomach. It was a picture of Linda kissing Derek. Full on, lips locked. I couldn't believe it. I didn't want to believe it. It had to be some mistake, right? A misunderstanding? But Derek didn't sound like someone who was lying. He explained how Linda was really good at covering her tracks. She had apparently been doing this for months, sneaking around, lying to me, and keeping everything hidden behind a wall of excuses. He said she'd tell me she was working late or going out with her friends, but in reality, she was out with him and who knows how many others. I felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me. I remember just sitting there, staring at my phone in complete disbelief. For a moment, I thought I might be dreaming. I kept trying to make sense of it, but nothing about it made sense. I don't know why, but I agreed to meet Derek. Maybe I thought seeing him face to face would help me understand this nightmare. Maybe I just needed the closure I didn't even know I wanted. He suggested a neutral place, a coffee shop not far from my work, and I agreed. The whole drive there, my mind was racing. What was I going to say to him? What was I going to say to Linda? How could she do this to me? To us? I couldn't wrap my head around it, but I knew one thing. I needed answers. When I walked into that coffee shop and saw Derek, it was like everything around me went silent. I don't know if it was the shock or just the weight of what was happening, but I felt numb. He wasn't what I expected. He was just a regular guy, mid-30s, kind of scruffy, wearing a hoodie like he didn't have a care in the world. But there was something in his eyes. He looked unbothered, like he had no problem ripping my heart out. We sat down, and for the next hour, Derek gave me the full rundown. He talked about how Linda had been seeing him and other guys for months, always making excuses when I asked about her plans. How she was so good at lying that I never suspected a thing. He told me Linda was always careful about erasing texts, changing her passwords, and acting all innocent when she was caught. He even said that when she talked about me, she made it sound like we had problems, like our marriage was on the rocks, but in reality, I never knew what hit me. I wasn't angry yet. I think I was still in shock. But every word Derek spoke just shattered whatever little bit of trust one had left. Linda wasn't just slipping away. She wasn't tired from work or stressed out about life. She was lying. She had been lying to me for months, and I never saw it. It hurt in a way I can't really describe. When I left that meeting, I felt like a different person. Everything I thought I knew about my life, about my marriage, was a lie. I knew I had to confront Linda, but I didn't know how. And I didn't know if I was ready for what I was about to do. I spent the rest of that day in a daze. I couldn't focus on anything. Work, eating, even just sitting down and breathing felt like too much. My mind kept replaying the images of Linda with Derek, the photos she probably never expected I'd see. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. But anger didn't hit me right away. It was this cold, hollow feeling that settled deep in my chest. Like everything I thought I knew about my wife was suddenly a joke. How had I not seen it? How could I have been so blind? I didn't talk to anyone about it, not even my best friend. I knew if I said anything out loud, it would make it real. And I wasn't ready for that. Not yet. I needed to face Linda first, make sure everything Derek had said was true. That night, Linda came home late as usual, smelling like alcohol, maybe a little too much, and acting like nothing was different. She tried to kiss me on the cheek, like she always did, but I stepped back. There was no tenderness left in me for her. I wasn't even sure I could look at her without feeling sick. I had so many questions, but I didn't ask them. Not yet. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do, but something told me I had to take control. I had to make this my decision, not hers. So, I waited until the weekend. I figured we'd go out, like we'd planned, to a restaurant. Give her one last chance to come clean before I dropped the bomb. I thought, maybe if she would just admit it, maybe if she would show some remorse, I could make sense of this mess. Maybe I could salvage something. I didn't tell her what I knew. I didn't tell her about the photos, or Derek, or how everything in our life was built on lies. I kept quiet, and I just packed her things. All of them. I didn't care about the presents, the jewelry, the nice clothes she had, all the gifts she'd gotten over the years. I tossed them into garbage bags, one after another, like I was clearing out some kind of foreign object from my life. I didn't even take the time to fold anything. It was all just tossed in there. No care, no effort, just done. I moved fast, like I had a deadline. She wasn't going to walk in and get comfortable like everything was fine. When she came home from work that day, I was ready. We didn't go home first. I told her I had a surprise for her. Dinner at that restaurant she'd been wanting to try for months. She seemed confused but went along with it. As soon as we were in the car, I felt the tension in the air. She must have known something was off, but she didn't ask. I didn't offer any explanations. The drive was slow, deliberately so. My mind was running through everything that had happened, every moment I'd missed, every lie I hadn't caught. By the time we were a few miles out of town, I pulled off the road abruptly, throwing the car into park. I turned to her and without saying anything, I started grabbing the bags of her stuff from the back seat, one by one. I tossed them onto the sidewalk, watching her face twist from confusion to concern. She asked what I was doing, but I didn't answer. She asked where we were going, and I just pointed to the pile of her things. "Those are yours. You need to get out," I told her, my voice flat. Her eyes widened. She started to protest, asking what was going on, what was happening. But there was no more "we" in my mind. There was just me, and her lies. I gave her the divorce papers, handed them to her without a second thought. They were already signed. And just to make sure she understood what I was doing, I showed her the picture of her kissing Derek, the one she probably thought would never come back to haunt her. "You don't live here anymore," I said, handing her the papers. The shock on her face was almost too much to watch. She didn't even say anything at first. She just stared at me like she couldn't believe what was happening. She didn't cry, didn't beg, didn't try to justify herself. It was like the woman I thought I knew was gone, replaced by someone I didn't even recognize. I didn't want her to stay, didn't want her anywhere near me, so I shoved her out of the car. I know it sounds cold, but I didn't care at that point. I drove off without a second glance, leaving her standing there with all her things on the curb. I didn't even feel bad about it. I drove around for a while, just clearing my head. I didn't know where she was going, and frankly, I didn't care. I knew she'd figure it out. Maybe she'd go to her parents' house, maybe one of her friends. But I wasn't going to be the one to take her there. I felt nothing but relief. It was like I had been carrying a weight around for so long and finally, I had let it go. But I had no idea what was coming next. The next few days were a blur. I didn't want to talk to anyone. I didn't want to answer any questions, hear anyone's opinions, or even look at my phone. But life doesn't stop just because you've had your world ripped apart. I still had to go to work. I still had to face the fact that everything I thought was real had just crumbled in front of me. The house felt too quiet without Linda. I kept expecting to hear the sound of her voice, or the click of her heels on the floor as she came home. But there was nothing. Just the emptiness of a place that used to be a home. It was strange. I felt a weird mix of anger and freedom? Maybe relief? It's hard to explain. You spend so much time with someone, building a life together, and then suddenly it's like they never existed. Like they were just a shadow, a person who wasn't really there. I had to change the locks, of course. I couldn't believe I didn't think of that sooner. I guess I was too focused on just getting her out. But when I came home and saw that she'd tried to come back, it hit me harder than I expected. I was in the kitchen when I heard the knock on the door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I opened it, and there she was, Linda. She was standing there, her face red, like she'd been crying. She was holding her keys in one hand, the other pressed against the doorframe as if she thought it was still her house. She asked if we could talk, said she had nowhere else to go. I didn't even hesitate. I told her the locks had been changed. I had to make it clear that I wasn't going to let her back in. That was my first real step in closing that chapter. I didn't want her back. I didn't care how many tears she shed or what excuse she came up with. There was no going back after what she'd done. I wasn't even angry anymore. I had passed that stage. But it still stung, seeing her stand there, trying to pretend like nothing had happened. I felt disgusted, honestly. How could she have done this? How could she have thrown away everything we had for this? Linda tried to come up with some story about how she was just confused, how she'd made a mistake. She told me that Derek didn't mean anything, that it was all just a phase and she was sorry. But I didn't buy it. I didn't want to hear any more excuses. I'd heard enough of those from her over the years. I told her I didn't want to see her again. I called her family, told them what happened, and made it clear that I wasn't going to be the one to fix it. I wasn't going to be the one to help her pick up the pieces of her life when she had torn mine apart. It wasn't just the affair that hurt, it was everything that came with it. The lies, the manipulation, the way she made me doubt myself for so long. But I couldn't waste any more time thinking about her. I had to keep moving forward. A few days after she left, I did something I probably should have done sooner. I went to my mom's house. I hadn't talked to her much since the separation. It had been a while, honestly. But I needed her. I needed to hear her voice and just be around someone who cared. Mom always knew how to make me feel like everything would be okay, even when I didn't believe it myself. We talked for hours, about everything and nothing. I needed that. I needed to remember that there were still people who loved me, who weren't going to betray me. After the talk with my mom, I knew it was time to focus on the future. I wasn't going to let Linda's actions define who I was or what my life was going to be. I had bigger things ahead. But first, I had to do something for myself. I had a dream I'd been holding on to for years, buying my mom a house. She'd always dreamed of owning a place of her own, and I'd promised her that one day, I'd make it happen. I wasn't going to let anything stop me from keeping that promise. And so, I threw myself into work. I didn't care how much overtime I had to put in. I didn't care about the long hours. I didn't care about anything except that I was going to make it happen. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I was done with the past. Done with the lies and the broken trust. It was time to build something real, something that mattered. So I kept working, kept saving. It wasn't fast, but it was steady. Every paycheck, every month I got closer to the goal. I wasn't just doing it for my mom anymore. I was doing it for me too. I was rebuilding my life, brick by brick, and no one, especially not Linda, was going to take that from me. And then one day I finally made it. I bought the house. The one my mom had dreamed of. It wasn't huge, but it was beautiful. It was a fresh start. For both of us. It was hard not to think about Linda sometimes, but I kept pushing forward. I had a new focus now. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was in control of my life again. What happened with Linda wasn't my fault. I couldn't keep blaming myself. It was on her. It always had been. And now, it was time to live for me. It's funny how life works out sometimes. Just when you think things are hopeless, something or someone comes along and changes everything. I don't know if it was the house, or just finally getting my life back on track after Linda, but I started feeling like I was finally turning a corner. There were still moments when I'd get stuck in my head, rethinking everything, wondering what went wrong or how I missed all the signs. But slowly, I stopped looking back so much. I started thinking about what I wanted next, what I could build for myself now that the wreckage of my marriage was behind me. A couple of months passed after I moved my mom into her new house. It felt good, seeing her finally settle into a place she could call her own. I could tell she was happy, and that was enough for me. I'd been so focused on making this happen for her, I didn't really think about my own happiness. But I knew it was time to start looking forward. One night, a friend of mine invited me out to grab a drink. At first, I hesitated. After everything that happened with Linda, I wasn't sure I was ready to dive back into the whole dating scene. Honestly, the thought of being with someone else felt like a distant, uncomfortable idea. I had a lot of trust issues to work through, and I wasn't sure if I was even capable of trusting someone again. But my buddy wouldn't let it go, so I agreed. We ended up at a small bar, a quiet place where the music was low and the conversation could flow. It was nice. Just being out, having a drink, not thinking about work or the mess that was my past. It felt like a normal night, a night where I could just be me for once, not the guy whose wife cheated on him. I remember we were talking about something stupid, like sports or whatever, when I noticed her. Emma. She was sitting across the bar with a few friends, laughing, and for some reason, she caught my eye. She wasn't what I would call drop-dead gorgeous or anything, but there was something about her energy, something real. I couldn't put my finger on it, but she had this warmth, this kindness that made me feel like she wasn't just another person in a room. She was present in a way I hadn't noticed in a long time. I didn't think much of it at first. I'm not the type to approach someone out of the blue, especially after everything that happened with Linda. But something about that night, maybe it was just the way I was feeling, made me take a chance. So, after a little more liquid courage, I made the move. I walked over and introduced myself. It wasn't some big romantic moment or anything dramatic. I just said hi, and we talked for a while. She wasn't too forward, just easygoing, asking about me and laughing at my dumb jokes. It was nice. I wasn't thinking about the past. I wasn't worried about trust or if this was some kind of trap. I just enjoyed the conversation. We exchanged numbers, and over the next few weeks, we went on a few casual dates. We kept things simple. No pressure. Emma wasn't looking for anything complicated, and neither was I. At that point, I wasn't even sure if I wanted a relationship. But Emma made me feel comfortable, like I could actually be myself again. I didn't have to pretend. With her, I didn't have to explain the mess of my past or what happened with Linda. It didn't matter. We just spent time together, getting to know each other one step at a time. I'm not going to lie, it wasn't all smooth sailing. I still had baggage. The scars from Linda's betrayal weren't going to disappear overnight. I'd get moments of doubt, thinking maybe Emma was just like Linda, or maybe I wasn't cut out for this whole trusting again thing. But Emma was patient with me. She didn't push. She just let things happen naturally. Over time, I started realizing that maybe it wasn't about forgetting the past, it was about not letting it control me anymore. Emma wasn't Linda. She didn't deserve to be treated like I was still the broken guy who had been lied to. One weekend, after a few months of seeing each other, we spent the whole day hiking. We'd walked for hours, talking about everything and nothing. At the end of the trail, there was a small, quiet lake with a view of the mountains. We sat by the water, and for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. I didn't need to be constantly looking over my shoulder. I didn't need to worry about the next betrayal, or if someone was hiding something. I was allowed to let go. Emma wasn't asking me to be perfect. She just wanted me to be me, flaws and all. Later, as the sun started setting, I realized I wasn't just healing from the past. I was building something new. Something real. And, for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was actually looking forward to the future. It wasn't about getting back at Linda. It wasn't about proving anything to anyone. It was about me. About moving forward, piece by piece, until I could finally see myself as whole again. Emma didn't complete me or fix me, but she made me realize that I could be happy again. I didn't need to hold on to the anger anymore. I didn't need to carry that weight. I was free. And now, I was finally ready to live for myself. To build the life I deserved. Life after Linda was strange. I was walking this fine line between moving on and not forgetting what happened. The trust issues were still there, lurking in the back of my mind every time I got a text or a phone call from someone new. But I knew I couldn't let that dictate my future forever. I couldn't let Linda's mistakes define what was possible for me. With Emma, things were different from the start. She wasn't perfect, and neither was I, but for the first time since my world had come crashing down, I felt like I could just breathe. I wasn't looking for someone to fix me or save me from the pain I had gone through. What I needed was someone who would let me be me, without judgment or expectations. And that's exactly what Emma gave me. We weren't rushing into anything, but I could tell from the way we spent time together that we were both in the same place, open to whatever came next. It wasn't like with Linda, where everything had been so intense, so fast, and then everything fell apart in the blink of an eye. With Emma, it felt like I was building something real, slowly, brick by brick. It was steady, and for once, steady felt right. One night, a few months after we started seeing each other, we were at her place, sitting on the couch with a bottle of wine, watching some random Netflix show. It was a normal, comfortable evening. But as we were talking, I found myself thinking back on everything. The mess with Linda, the hurt, the anger, the way my world had been turned upside down. I didn't know what made me do it, but I just turned to Emma and told her the truth. I told her about Linda, about the affair, about the betrayal, and about the way I had been left with nothing but questions. I told her how I felt so stupid for not seeing it sooner, how I had put so much trust in someone who didn't even deserve it. Emma just listened. She didn't interrupt. She didn't offer any advice or try to fix it. She just let me talk. And for the first time in ages, I felt heard. Not judged, not pitied, just understood. After I finished talking, Emma just looked at me and said something simple but meaningful. "You're not broken, Lyle. You're just healing." I don't think she fully understood what that meant for me, but I did. It was the first time someone had looked at me without seeing the wreckage, without seeing the guy who'd been left behind. She saw me as someone who was in the process of moving forward, not stuck in the past. That night, I realized that I wasn't afraid of loving again. Not with her. Not with Emma. She wasn't Linda. And maybe that's what I needed to remind myself of, every day. I had been so afraid of letting someone else in, afraid of getting hurt again. But Emma wasn't here to tear me down. She wasn't here to make me doubt myself or my worth. She was just here, with me, for the ride. As the months went on, things started falling into place. I moved forward with my life, and with Emma by my side, I began to feel like I could build something worth having again. I focused on work, on my goals, and on building a life I was proud of. But I also made space for love. Real love. A love that was based on honesty, trust, and the simple understanding that both of us had our own baggage, but that didn't mean we couldn't be happy. In the back of my mind, I would sometimes hear Linda's voice. The old doubts would creep in, but Emma's presence calmed that noise. I didn't need to carry that weight anymore. I could love again without constantly looking over my shoulder, worried about being blindsided. One day, we took a trip to the mountains. It was a weekend getaway, just the two of us, and we spent the whole weekend hiking, eating at small diners, and talking about our futures. On the last night, as we were sitting by a campfire, Emma turned to me with that same warmth I'd first noticed when we met. "You know," she said, "I'm really proud of you." I didn't know what to say to that. She smiled. "You've been through a lot, but you've come so far. You're stronger than you think." I looked at her for a moment, taking in what she was saying. Maybe I was stronger than I gave myself credit for. Maybe I had come a long way. And maybe, just maybe, I could trust myself to love again. For real. That was when I realized I was ready to take the next step. I wasn't afraid of loving Emma or trusting her. I wasn't afraid of being vulnerable or giving her my heart. I was ready for it. A few months later, I found myself standing in front of Emma, holding a small box in my hand. My heart was pounding, but this time, it wasn't from fear. It was from hope. I didn't need to ask for forgiveness, or find a way to make everything right. I just needed to give Emma what I had to offer, the best version of myself that I could be. I knew it wouldn't be perfect, but I knew it would be real. And that's what love is, isn't it? Not about perfection, but about being real with each other. I asked her to marry me that night, under the stars, and when she said yes, I knew I was making the right choice. For once, I was letting go of the past, trusting the future, and believing in something better. Something that was mine. Something that was real. I wasn't just healing anymore. I was living. I don't know how long it took, but when Emma and I finally got married, it felt like the world had shifted in a way I didn't even know I needed. I've never been a guy for big, lavish things. Never cared much about flashy weddings or extravagant parties. But for us, it was perfect. We kept it small, just close friends, family, the people who really mattered. Emma looked incredible, of course, but it was more than that. It was the way she looked at me, the way I knew we were both starting something real. We got married at a small chapel by the lake. The sun was setting, the water reflecting the colors of the sky. It was like something out of a movie, but better, because it was ours. I remember standing there, watching her walk down the aisle, feeling my heart race. In a way, I never thought I'd be standing there at all, not after everything that happened with Linda. But somehow, I had ended up here, with someone who was willing to take a chance on me again. Someone who saw me for who I was, not who I used to be. The ceremony was simple. Emma said her vows with that soft smile of hers, the one that always made me feel like everything was going to be okay, no matter what. And when it was my turn, I didn't have some grand speech or perfect words. I just spoke from the heart, told her I'd never take her for granted, that I was ready for whatever came next, together. That night, we celebrated with a small reception at a local restaurant. I didn't even care about the fancy food or the wine. I just looked around and saw people who were happy for us, who supported us through the ups and downs. It felt like a fresh start, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of what came next. But after the wedding came the reality check. It wasn't just all sunshine and happiness. Emma and I had talked about building a life together, about creating something more than just the day-to-day grind, but figuring out what that actually looked like wasn't as easy as it seemed. A few months after the wedding, I decided I wanted to do something different. I'd been working at the same job for years, doing the same routine, feeling like I was stuck in a cycle that didn't excite me anymore. The thought of spending another decade doing the same thing, day in and day out, was draining. So I quit. I know it sounds impulsive, but I had this idea in my head that I could build something on my own. I wanted to create a little business, a mini mercantile, something small, local. I always liked the idea of having a place where people could find unique, hard-to-find things, something a little different from the big box stores. I put everything I had into it, time, energy, money. I dove into the details, figuring out what products I wanted to sell, how I was going to market it, what I needed to make it work. Emma was supportive, though I could tell she was a little concerned. She's always been practical, and I think she knew how risky it was. But she didn't try to talk me out of it. She trusted me, and for a while, that felt like enough. Eventually, I had to face the facts. The business wasn't going to make it. I had to close it down. It felt like a punch to the gut. I'd put everything I had into it, hopes, dreams, money, and now it was gone. I hated admitting defeat, especially to Emma. I didn't want to let her down. I didn't want to seem like the guy who tried and failed. But I couldn't ignore the reality anymore. When I told her, she didn't say, "I told you so," or get angry. She just hugged me, quietly. She knew I was devastated. But she also knew that failing wasn't the end. I'd tried. And sometimes, that's enough. It was hard to swallow, but I realized that Emma wasn't with me because of my successes or failures. She was with me because she believed in me, not just the idea of what I could become. In the end, I learned a lot about myself. I'd always been the type to charge ahead, not thinking too much about the consequences. But this failure showed me that it's okay to stumble. It's okay to fall. The important part is picking yourself back up and learning from it. I still wanted to build something that mattered, but I knew I had to take a different approach. After the business failed, I found myself standing at a crossroads, unsure of what came next. I had all this ambition, this desire to build something bigger than myself, but the reality hit me hard. All the energy I had put into the shop didn't pan out. I realized I had been so caught up in trying to make something work that I hadn't really stopped to ask myself why I wanted it in the first place. Maybe I was trying to prove something to myself, to the world. But I didn't have to prove anything anymore. I wasn't that guy anymore, the one who tried to find validation in success or in doing things the right way. Instead of getting down on myself or wallowing in self-pity, I decided to focus on what I could control. I went back to work in the same field I had been in before. Nothing glamorous, but it paid the bills and gave me structure. It was a comfort, honestly. It was familiar. It wasn't the dream I had once envisioned, but I realized it didn't need to be. Sometimes, life isn't about chasing perfection. Sometimes, it's about accepting the things that are right in front of you and making the best out of them. Emma was there for all of it. Through the business closure, the doubts, the moments where I questioned myself. She was still by my side, the one steady thing I could count on, even when everything else felt like it was falling apart. She didn't ask me to explain myself or apologize for the failure. She just let me work through it. And that's when I realized something important. It wasn't the failures that mattered, it was how we handled them. And Emma, she handled it with patience, grace, and unconditional support. In the weeks that followed, I spent a lot of time reflecting. I didn't rush into any big decisions or new projects. I let myself breathe, let myself think. Emma and I would go on long walks together, talk about our day, about life, about everything and nothing at all. It was during those quiet moments that I started to feel something shift inside me. I had this sense of calm I hadn't known in a long time. Maybe I had been chasing after things for all the wrong reasons. Maybe what I needed most wasn't a business or grand success. It was just to be at peace with where I was. To be happy with what I had, and not always be looking for the next big thing. I'll admit, I still had moments where I thought about Linda. It wasn't that I missed her. I wasn't stupid enough to believe that was possible. But I still wondered every now and then, what could have been if things had gone differently? The what-ifs would creep in. But those thoughts became less and less frequent as time passed. I learned to let them go. Emma and I talked a lot about our future, about what we wanted to build together. The dreams we had before the failure of the mercantile were still there, just quieter now. Maybe one day I'd try again. Maybe not with a store, but something else. But for now, I was okay with letting that dream evolve, letting it take whatever shape it needed to. I didn't have to have all the answers right now. Life with Emma had a kind of simplicity that I appreciated. There were no pretenses. No trying to be something I wasn't. No pressure to be perfect or to have it all figured out. It was just two people, working through the ups and downs, supporting each other through the mess of life. And that was enough. More than enough. Then came the moment I didn't expect, the moment that really made me realize how far I'd come. One night, as we were sitting on the porch, having a drink and watching the sunset, Emma turned to me and said something that made my chest tighten. She told me she was pregnant. I froze for a second, unsure of how to process it. I wasn't scared, but there was this mix of emotions that hit me all at once. I had always wanted to be a father, but after everything that had happened with Linda, I wasn't sure I was ready. But I also knew, in my heart, that this was different. I had learned from my mistakes, and I was in a place now where I could be the kind of father I wanted to be. Steady, reliable, there. Emma smiled when she saw the look on my face, sensing my hesitation. But I wasn't scared. I was excited. It was just a lot to take in. I couldn't believe that after all the chaos, all the heartbreak, I was about to become a father. This time, everything felt right. We talked about it that night, about what we wanted for our future, Emma and me, and our growing family. We didn't have it all figured out, but we didn't need to. It wasn't about having every detail mapped out. It was about the commitment, the understanding, and the trust that we would face it all together. The months that followed were filled with the usual preparations, doctor's appointments, baby showers, setting up the nursery. But it wasn't just the baby stuff that was important to me, it was the quiet moments with Emma. The moments where I realized how lucky I was, how much I had rebuilt after everything. And this time, I was really living. Not running from my past or trying to outrun my mistakes, but standing firm in the life I had created, with a future ahead of me. There were still moments of doubt, of course. There were times when I thought about the past, about Linda, about everything that led me to where I was now. But those thoughts didn't control me anymore. They were just passing memories, pieces of the story that had shaped me, but didn't define me. I wasn't the same guy I was when I married Linda. I wasn't the same guy who tried and failed at a business. I was someone new, someone who had learned from mistakes, but wasn't afraid of them anymore. I was someone who was building a future with the person who mattered most. Someone who knew that life wasn't about being perfect. It was about the people you loved, the choices you made, and the way you moved forward. And as I looked at Emma, feeling the baby kick for the first time, I knew that no matter what happened, we were going to be okay. We were going to build this life together. Real, imperfect, and full of possibility. That was enough for me. And for the first time in a long time, it felt like everything was exactly how it was supposed to be. The baby was due in the spring, and I couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change in a way I wasn't quite prepared for. I mean, I was prepared, at least I thought I was. But no amount of reading parenting books or watching YouTube videos could prepare me for the reality of what it meant to bring a child into this world. The months leading up to the birth were a blur of preparations, late-night talks with Emma about names, baby-proofing the house, and me pretending to understand all the little things that came with a pregnancy. Honestly, Emma carried most of the load when it came to the baby's future. But I was there, supporting her, trying my best to be the guy she needed me to be. The guy who wouldn't bail when things got hard, the guy who would step up. It felt like life was moving so quickly, but at the same time, it felt like I was being given a second chance. Not just with Emma, but with everything. The mistakes I made, the pain I went through, it was all behind me now, or at least, it was far enough behind that I could actually look forward without it constantly haunting me. I wasn't running from my past anymore. I was living, and that was something I hadn't really done in a long time. When the day came, Emma went into labor unexpectedly early. I was freaking out, totally unprepared for the chaos that came with it. I tried to keep it together for her, but inside, my head was spinning. I remember sitting in the waiting room, pacing, waiting for news, trying not to let the anxiety take over. The same way I had once felt after Linda's betrayal, only now, there was no fear of the unknown. I wasn't afraid of what was coming. I was excited, nervous, yes, but not scared. This was different. This was hours. It felt like hours before the nurse came to find me, but in reality, it was probably only a few minutes. She told me to come in, and when I walked into that room and saw Emma holding our daughter for the first time, it was like everything in the world stopped. There was no noise, no chaos, no past. Just the three of us, finally in the moment. I hadn't even realized I was holding my breath until I exhaled, walking over to Emma's side, and looking at our little girl. She was so tiny, wrapped in a blanket, her face scrunched up as she slept. The feeling of holding her, of knowing she was mine, ours, was indescribable. It was like a switch had been flipped in me. I wasn't just thinking about me anymore, not in the way I used to. It wasn't about my failures or my past. It was about her now. Our daughter. A new life. A fresh start for all of us. I had no idea what the future would hold. No idea if I was going to be a perfect dad, or if I'd screw up and make all the wrong choices. But for the first time, I wasn't worried about the what-ifs. I was here, I was present, and that was enough. It had to be. As Emma and I sat there together, just staring at her, I realized something I hadn't really processed before. This little girl was going to be everything I ever needed. She would be the thing that kept me grounded when life got tough. She would be my motivation, my reason to keep pushing forward, no matter how hard things got. Over the next few weeks, as we settled into a rhythm with the baby, I realized just how much my life had changed. No more late nights spent worrying about the mistakes I'd made or the things I couldn't control. No more wondering if I'd ever find happiness after Linda. Now, all I wanted to do was focus on the future, and on the family Emma and I had built. Things weren't perfect, of course. There were sleepless nights, stress, and all the usual stuff that comes with having a newborn. But even in those moments of exhaustion, I never felt overwhelmed. With Emma beside me, I knew we could handle anything. Sometimes I'd sit on the porch, holding my daughter in my arms as she napped, and just think about everything. About how far I'd come. How I used to be that guy. A guy who let his life be controlled by the mistakes of others, by the betrayal of his ex-wife, by the failure of a business venture. But now, I was just a guy who was trying to do the best he could. A guy who had rebuilt his life from the ground up, who had a family that loved him, and a future he could look forward to. It was hard to even remember the person I was before Emma, before the baby. All of the old hurts, the confusion, the anger, it all seemed so distant now. I wasn't that person anymore. I had evolved into someone else. Someone better. Someone who had learned the most important lesson of all. The only thing that really matters is the people you choose to have by your side. And now, as I looked at Emma, watching her with our daughter, I knew that whatever happened, I was ready. I was here, present and whole. I had everything I needed, not because I had it all figured out, but because I finally understood that the strength to move forward wasn't in the past, wasn't in the mistakes I'd made. It was in the love I had and the future I was building. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly at peace with everything.